Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are around the world, and welcome back to Sideboard Files. My name is Manuel, I'm your host here on the show, and I'm joined once again by Emil Kirschbaum to talk about Dredge again.
Oh, nice to be here again.
Hello, welcome back, my friend. So we get to do another episode about Dredge, second episode, discuss more matchups, and the list you're playing at the moment is, it's still the same, of episode 36 of Sideboard Files. We did a few weeks ago.
The deck is mostly the same, except for the new card from Throne of Eldrazi, Merchant of the Veil, being tested instead of Insolent Neonate, because it does basically the same job in the first turn and has some utility afterwards, but except for that, everything is the same sideboard, rest of the deck, anything. So
Okay, so you're testing this new card.
Yeah.
But for the cyber plans, doesn't really have this huge impact.
You still would board out Merchant when you would board out Neonate before, and so on. So it's exactly the same except for the one card.
Okay, for the first purpose of this video, we just keep the list as is.
Exactly.
And if this is what you play at the moment, and you will see the results with the new testing sessions, let's say.
Yeah.
All right, so let's kick off the Cyber guys straight away then with these extra bonus matches, let's call it like that. And the first I'd like to talk about is a TitanShift Amulet Titan, because more or less, they're not exactly the same deck, but I guess your strategy against them is the same. So first of all, is it a good matchup or a bad matchup for you?
I would say overall it's a favorite matchup if you have a little bit of luck. If you get unlucky and don't hit a single Creeping Chill in your first game, then it can be a bit hard, because in the first game it basically comes down to them being able to do 18 damage with the first Scapeshift, usually on turn 5. And if you hit a single Creeping Chill or two, you're usually above 18 even after you fetched and shocked. And that doesn't kill you instantly. So hitting one Creeping Chill and a few creatures is usually enough to win game one. Afterwards, it gets a bit more tricky because they also bring in stuff like Anger of the Gods, but usually if you just keep your deck running and don't get screwed in the mulliganing, you usually should be fine.
All right. You mentioned Anger of the Gods. Are the cards that you expect them to side against you?
That's mostly it, actually. They used to play stuff like Draftigger's Cage and Tormod's Crypt and maybe even Relic of Progenitus, and during Heroic time also Leyline, but nowadays they usually just play Anger of the Gods.
Okay, so this is like your, let's say, the card you watch and you watch out for.
You play around, you watch out for. You can't really play against it, like you don't have counter spells, but you can just not to commit too many creatures to the board that in case they die, you can just recover. But yeah, mostly it's just trying to keep your deck running. And also disrupting them a little bit, which I'll talk about later when we talk about the cards. But yeah, the game plan stays mostly the same.
Yeah, playing around Anger of the Gods, trying to disrupt them a bit, and just win with your traditional game plan A. Right, let's have a look then at the cyber plans. What do you side out and what do you side in against TitanShift or Amulet Titan?
Yeah, so against the various Titan decks, I usually board out one Neonate, one Golgari Thug, and one Priced Amalgam, and I board in 3 Thoughtseize. And leave it at that. Some people also board additionally Dark Blast from the sideboard if they play it, or even play stuff like Ghost Quarter or Alpine Moon, but I usually just stick to 3 Thoughtseize.
Yeah, that's what you want to do in the end.
Yeah.
So disrupt in the hand, you slow them down, and then you just win.
Yeah, the idea
hopefully.
The idea is to hopefully play Thoughtseize either on turn 1 or turn 2 after you, and then play an Enabler on the other turn. So either you go turn 1 Treecorn and turn 2 Thoughtseize and another Enabler hopefully, or you go turn 1 Thoughtseize and turn 2 Cathartic Reunion, and usually that should be enough to win the game after you either took away. Like, if they keep a hand of lands, ramp, and the Titan, you just take the Titan and hope they don't draw another one, or a Summoner's Pact. And if they have a hand of, like, Anger of the Gods and a few lands, then you just take their Anger of the God and hope that they don't draw any action too quickly, and just hope that Bloodcast and Amalgams are going to get there.
Yeah. They need some time, actually, to execute their strategy, their game plan. And, of course, if they don't draw the sweepers, then you are set more or less in the end.
Yeah, well, the thing is, if you don't know their hand, you usually have to play around the sweeper, so like don't really go over 2 or 3 creatures on the board, because losing too many makes winning quite hard afterwards. But if you see that they don't have an Anger of the Gods, you usually can just go all in and try to win as fast as possible.
Yeah, okay.
One thing I would add is that if you have a lot of Amulet Titan decks in your meta, they can be quite tricky because they can loop Pajuka Bog with one of their bounce lands, like the 2-mana bounce lands from the Ravnica sets, like Azorius, Chansey, and
Yeah, they're with the guild's colors. Yeah, those
Yeah,
lands.
exactly.
And-
That can be quite tricky. Like if they have an Azusa in play, they can play Bujukabok every turn. So if that is in your meta, I would recommend playing one Ghost Quarter in the sideboard, just so you can, in theory, just Ghost Quarter the land away in response to the trigger of returning to the hand. Another option would be just playing Alpine Moon and just naming Bujukabok against them, because that usually is their only form of graveyard hate, because they can tutor it and reuse it, so they don't really need to even board anything in against you. Like a lot of Amulet Titan players just submit the same 60 cards against you again for game 2 and 3, because their main deck is prepared enough and they don't really play anything else on the sideboard. So yeah, if you have a lot of Amulet Titan, I would recommend either Alpine Moon or Ghost Quarter, but this should also work.
Okay, next matchup. Let's talk about Eldrazi Tron. I mean, used to be very good in the Faithless Looting meta because of Chalice of the Void and stuff. Now, it's still present, even if it's not as before. But yeah, I'd like to talk about it anyway, because I think it's still like a solid contender in the modern meta game. Is it a good matchup or a bad matchup for you?
It's better than before, because during Hogak times they used to be very committed on the Chalice plan, and also bring in 4 Leyline. Nowadays they usually are down to 2, maybe 3 pieces of graveyard hate from the sideboard, and don't play that hard for Chalice on turn 1 anymore, because it doesn't win every matchup automatically anymore. When I say any matchup, it used to be any Faithless Looting matchup, which used to be good enough.
Yeah.
But nowadays they have to be a little bit more diversified and have to play a little bit more on the fair game plan, instead of just committing to Chalice on 1, because it just doesn't do enough anymore, which either leads to a little bit of a shift in how they build the deck or just how they mulligan. So game 1 usually goes your way, because nowadays they don't just mulligan to Chalice on 1 anymore and hope that wins the game outright. So I would say overall it's a good matchup. Post sideboard, they can, like if they get lucky and hit 2 pieces of graveyard hate, it can be tough, but mostly you're going to be fine.
All right. So strategy-wise, what do you want to do in the games post-sideboard?
It doesn't really change that much. The plan stays usually the same. Just put your deck into your graveyard, get some creatures back, and win that way. And the only thing you really do is board in a few cards to destroy whatever graveyard hate they have, usually either Relic of Progenitus or Grafdigger's Cage. And if you deal with 1 or 2 of those, the game usually goes your way.
All right, okay. So let's have a look at the cyber plans then. So what you bought out or what you bought in?
Okay. So against the Eldrazi Tron, I bought out 1 Neonate, 1 Golgari Thug, and 1 Gemstone Mine, and bring in 2 Ancient Grudges and 1 Blaststone. Blaststone is just great against Eldrazi Tron, because even if they have a Grafdigger's Cage, you can still keep dredging your cards, and if you have a Life from the Loam, you can get it back from the graveyard, and then just play the Blaststone and blow up the cage without even having to wait a turn, because it starts with 1 mark. Against other stuff like Crypt or such, like Tormod's Crypt, you don't really have to destroy that. You just need to start playing a slow game, don't commit too much into your graveyard. If they crack it like after 1 or 2 turns, you usually can just rebuild afterwards. So against stuff like Tormod's Crypt or Relic of Progenitus, your plan is really to destroy it, but just start playing slowly. Just dredging 3, maybe 4 cards a turn with Loam and Golgari Thug, and don't commit too hard with Cathartic Reunion or such. And yeah, for stuff you can't play around, like Grafdigger's Cage, you have Blaststone and Ancient Grudges.
Yeah, the pace of the game slows down a bit.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay. But then this is like the key to actually make sure that you don't lose too much to these cards. If you can't, of course, like remove them directly.
Yes, exactly.
And yeah, okay. Very, very, very clear.
Yeah, the Ancient Grudge also doubles a little bit, like if they mulligan to find their graveyard hate a bit too hard, you can also Ancient Grudge, like if they're missing land drops, and then at some point play the second land and also play Expedition map. Sometimes you Ancient Grudge the map because you can keep them off the 3rd land. Or if they play Chalice on 1, you can try to Ancient Grudge it away, so you can put your so you can play your enablers again. Like if you kept a hand of let's say land, Shriekhorn, and Ancient Grudge, the Shriekhorn enables the Ancient Grudge makes you play the Shriekhorns again if you remove the Chalice. So
yeah,
it's a very good card overall, the matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the best arts you can. I mean, the fact that you can actually play it again. I mean, you can play it twice. It's a great value, absolutely. Mm-hmm. All right, next matchup, Grixis Death Shadow. Is it this the most popular variant played at the moment, or is it Mardu Death Shadow?
I
Actually,
think
that's played?
Grixis is a little bit more popular just because people like to play blue a lot, and also Maru is just
Okay. Okay.
a bit weird of a deck overall.
Would your strategy be the same against those two decks, or would actually change the approach a little bit?
Because Mardu has wide, they might be sideboarding Rest in Peace, so you'd also have to bring in Nature's Claim, which I don't bring in against Grixis Death Shadow, but otherwise the strategy would
Okay.
be very same-ish. Like,
Okay.
I would probably board in 2,
Yeah.
not a full 3 Nature's Claim against them if I don't know what they're playing, but it's very similar.
All right, so let's stick to Grixis Death Shadow then. And well, generally speaking, good matchup or bad matchup?
I'd say it's a hard matchup because you have to be very precise with your decision making. Like, the one decision you really have to make is, do I use my Creeping Chill trigger? Because if you mill a Creeping Chill, you don't actually have to use it. You can decide to just leave it in your graveyard and not make them lose 3 life and have you get 3 life. Because in some places, you have to consider that although you gain 3 life and they lose 3 life, the growth of their Death Shadow doesn't kill you. But if they have something that gives a double strike, like Tuber Battle Rage, that's essentially you losing 3 more life more to that exchange if they have it, if you don't have a blocker. So you need to be careful, but yeah, you don't want to get them too low so that Battle Rage kills you. So you need to play a little bit more slowly until you can do like 7-9 damage in one turn and hopefully end it too quickly before their shadow gets too big. Other than that, is I'd say favorite matchup right now because I don't play too much Graveyard Hate. If they play Grixis Death Shadow with like 3 Snapcaster Mages and also 3 Surgicals from the sideboard, of course it gets a bit tougher, but even the Surgical Extraction you can play around nowadays. So overall, I would say it's a good matchup if you practice a bit.
All right. You mentioned Surgical Extraction.
Yes.
Are there other cards that you actually expect from them?
I don't think so, no. Some people still play Leyline, but most people don't want to play Leyline because it's an absolutely dead draw if you don't have it in your opener. And Surgical does mostly what you want Leyline to do against the graveyard matchups that Grixis Death Shadow is afraid of. So overall, I probably just expect Surgical Extraction. Of course, if you see Leyline in game 2, you need to adjust your sideboard plans so you have Nature's Claims, but I would usually just expect Surgical Extraction from them after game 1.
Nile Spellbomb, maybe they could use?
Occasionally, yes, they have that, though that's the card you usually see more out of Jund. But I think Grixis Death Shadow also plays a few sometimes. That again is a card, like if they have 1, you just have to start playing a little bit slower and make them activated when you have like 5-6 cards in your graveyard that are relevant, and then try to rebuild afterwards. Because mostly, like the point where they say, okay, this is going too far, I need to activate my spell bomb, is usually in your turn. So if they then spend their mana to activate the spell bomb, exile your graveyard, you usually still have mana to rebuild on the same turn, so you can just play a Cathartic Reunion afterwards. And if they don't have a big creature out already, you might also have another land open, so you can play for Stubborn Denial. So mostly, that's another card you can just play around and don't need to bring cards in against. Of course, if they also have Leyline, you might occasionally cast a Nature's Claim on the Spellbomb as well, if they didn't start with a Leyline, but it's usually just a card you would want to play around and not play against, so to say.
Okay. So that you don't really want to have a direct answer to it, but you want to play around it.
Yeah, of course. If you do have an answer, and of course, then you just destroy it first if it comes in handy, but you don't have to do that.
Okay. You mentioned that you have to adapt depending on the version of Death Shadow that you're actually facing. Grixis Death Shadow or Mardu Death Shadow. The cyber plans could be slightly different, but you have a sort of blueprint. So let's talk about your basic, let's say, cyber plan against Death Shadow, and then maybe we can speak about the differences as well.
Yes.
So what do you board out first, and what do you board in afterwards?
Okay. So if I don't know what my opponent is playing exactly in their sideboard, I always just sideboard out 2 Cathartic Reunion, 1 Blood Crypt, and 1 Price Amalgam, and bring in 3 Lightning Axe and 1 Blaststone. The reason for the cards I bring out being that Cathartic Reunion, while being a very good starter, is a card that post-sideboard gets a little bit worse, mostly because they have Stubborn Denial and also discard spells. And you just want to resolve your 1 mana enablers more than you want to hope that your Cathartic Reunion survives long enough. The Blood Crypt just being cut because you bring in another land from the sideboard, and you need to, you don't want to go above 20 lands really. And the Price Amalgam being cut because you don't want to cut too much of your enabling. You're already cutting to reunion, and cutting one payoff creature is usually fine.
Right. What comes in? You mentioned already.
Yes,
3
exactly.
Lightning Axe and 1 Black
Exactly.
Soul, right?
So the Lightning Axe is mostly for Gomag Angler because it always takes care of that. Just 5/5 for 1 mana usually blocks very well against this, which can be troublesome because it makes finishing them off quite hard. And it also deals with an early Death Shadow. Like if they don't really want to go too low, because if they're below 7, 2 Creeping Shields can take care of them without them being able to interact really. So they don't usually want to go too low. So the Death Shadows usually are like 3/3s, 4/4s, and maybe 5/5s. And in that situation, the Lightning Axe still deals with it. Of course, you don't want Lightning Axe if they have a fetch line open, because then they can just fetch for another land and make it grow a bit bigger. But yeah, Lightning Axe is just there to remove their creatures. The Blast Stone is there mostly because they have a lot of 1 mana stuff, which sadly Gomag Angler isn't, although they never really pay more than 1 mana for it. But you take care of all of the Death Shadows, and let's say things have to go very wrong that an attacking Gomag Angler defeats you. So you just really want to have the Blast Stone open in case they commit to the Teemo Battle Rage, so you can just take care of the Bloodghast, of the Death Shadow.
Death Shadow, yeah.
And it also deals with stuff like Grafdigger's Cage if they play that, though usually they don't because they also want to play the Snapcaster Mage. Apart from that, you don't really want to bring anything more else because although you could interact with other sides of the game plan, like as you mentioned, if they play Spellbomb, you could play Nature's Claim, which is actually quite nice against Death Shadow because they also gain 4 life. So the Death Shadow shrink again, but they can just sacrifice the Spellbomb in response, so that they actually gain the life. So that aspect isn't too relevant, and apart from that, they don't really play any other enchantments or artifacts. If they play Leonine, of course, you want Nature's Claim, but other than that, you just want to stick to like 3 or 4 cards you bring in, and not more really.
Okay, just to make sure that your deck keeps on running the way it should.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's assume that you realize after game 1, during game 1, that you actually are facing Mardu Death Shadow. So what will be the changes in your cyber plan?
So against Mardu, you would expect them to have Rest in Peace because like one of the big draws to playing white in Modern is having the good sideboard cards like Rest in Peace or Stony Silence. So if you play against Mardu, I would probably just bring in 2 Lightning Axe and probably another Nature's Claim and maybe cut, I don't know, another Narcomoeba or something, just to make a little bit more room, because even if you don't know that your opponent has stuff like Rest in Peace or so, you want to bring in like 2 Nature's Claims. So you, like if you have an OK 7, which also contains the Nature's Claim, you're just going to keep that on the basis that even if they have Rest in Peace, your slow hand is going to get there. If you know, of course, that they're playing Mardu and then see Rest in Peace in game 2, my recommendation would be to cut all the Lightning Axes, or like don't bring in any Lightning Axes, instead bring in 3 Nature's Claims and also 3 Thoughtseize, because that's a good thing about, or like the only strength you really have against Rest in Peace over other Gravity is that it costs 2 mana, so you usually get to play a spell before they play it. So Thoughtseize also deals with it very well without giving your opponent life. So yeah, I'd say adapt depending on what you see.
Yeah. Catching Rest in Peace in their hand, or destroying it on the battlefield. That's what you want to do.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Hopefully.
Okay, next matchup, Humans. Still around, still, let's say, solid deck, even if maybe not as favored as before, but definitely worth mentioning, sorry. And good matchup or bad matchup for you?
Oh, so it can be a bit tough because it's one of the few matchups where they can actually pretty reliably also win game 1, because mostly Dredge is the game that wins game 1 in most matchups. But against Humans, like if they're on the play and start with Kaiser Freebooter and Thalia, sometimes the hand you kept is just not going to do anything, because, for example, if they have a Thalia and your enabling card you kept was a Cathartic Reunion and you only have 2 lands, you're never going to cast it. And if they take your Cathartic Reunion before you can play turn 2 with their Kaiser Freebooter, you also never going to play anything in game 1. So they can just outright stop you in game 1 if you get unlucky. So that affects the match win percent quite a lot, actually, because this is a deck that relies on winning game 1 pretty reliably, and if you don't, it gets tough. So the decks that can win game 1 against you are actually a lot better than it seems, than just sometimes winning game 1, because game 1 is very important for the match win percentage.
Okay, so winning, if you lose game 1, things get very hard.
It gets tough, because they play main boss disruption that can get you before you get to play your payoff spells, and they also like even if you have your payoff spells and they don't disrupt you, sometimes their starts can be ridiculously fast. Like if they start with, let's say, Noble Hierarch into Champion of the Parish and Thalia's Lieutenant, and afterwards play another 2 Thalia's Lieutenant, they just commit so much power to the board where you just can't keep up. And if you just have a few Bloodcasts and a few early turns, you can't block anything. So then maybe your Narcomoeba blocks once and then dies, and then you're still left with just Bloodcasts. So sometimes they're just too fast in game 1. Of course, there are also the Human Sands that just take 20 turns to kill you if you don't interact with them. So those aren't really as threatening in game 1. But if they have a ridiculous start, like anything with 2 or more Thalia's Lieutenants is usually very threatening. So you need to be careful for that. Of course, Creeping Chill makes that a bit more controllable because you have more time to stabilize. But yeah, it's a matchup where you have to play very tightly in game 1 if you want to have a good chance to win it.
Let's talk about the game's boss sideboard. What cards do you actually expect from them?
Right now, when I play against humans, I don't actually expect them to bring in anything. Because a lot of lists just wanted the sideboard spots for other matchups like Burn. Like, the thing I usually expect them to have in the sideboard and bring against me is maybe Core Firewalker. Because they just gain a lot of life by creatures entering the battlefield, but apart from that, nothing much. If they play Grafdigger's Cage or such things, you of course need to adjust your sideboarding, but right now I just expect stuff like Firewalker. And usually, even though they gain a lot of life with Firewalker, like sometimes get up to 30 or something, you can usually overwhelm them by getting rid of the board with Conflagrate and Dark Blast and such, and then winning afterwards. Like, it doesn't really matter if they have 30 or 20 life because you attack a few times with your 3 Bloodcasts and 3 Price Amalgams, and that usually takes care of their life total very quickly.
Okay. In the game's boss sideboard, your strategy, do you want to control the board? Do you want to overwhelm them? Would you want to stabilize first? What do you want to do?
You don't really have the one set strategy. It depends on how the matchup goes. Like, if they commit a lot of creatures to the board early, your plan should be trying to find a Conflagrate and trying to take 2 or 3 creatures with it. Of course, if the game goes slowly and they play slowly and just commit a single Thalia and then maybe a Kaiser Freebooter, and then, I don't know, maybe 1 Mantis Rider and start attacking you for 3 every turn, you of course need to adjust to that and don't just try to force through it, because that usually means they have some other sort of interaction. I would say adapt to what your opponent does. If they are very slowly, you can try to just go all out and defeat them early. If they kept a very slow hand, I don't know, just lands and creatures, and no Ether Vials. If they do have Ether Vials and commit a lot to the board, your plan is usually trying to be controlling, trading creatures for 1 because you get your creatures back, and also destroying creatures with Dark Blast and Conflagrate. But yeah, it always depends on how their hand is shaping up, and also, of course, how your hand is shaping up.
Okay. Sideboard plans. I understand that you have different sideboard plans depending if you are on the play and on the draw. Basically, what board out changes and what board in stays the same, if I remember correctly. So let's have a look at what you board out on the draw first and on the play afterwards.
Yes, so on the draw, I usually cut 1 City of Brass, 1 Insolent Neonate, 1 Golgari Thug, and 2 Cathartic Reunion. The reason here being that Reunion just gets a lot worse if they have Thalia and Kaiser Freebooter. On the play, I board out the City of Brass and the Neonate and Thug as well. The only thing changed that instead of boarding out Reunions, I board out another Neonate and a Shriekhorn, because with the amount of enabling you cut from your deck, staying about the same Cathartic Reunion is just better if you're on the play, because you can pretty reliably resolve it, because they don't really have a way to disrupt it on turn 1. But yeah, that's basically the change I make.
Okay.
And what I bring in against humans is also very basic, because I don't really expect too much direct gravity attack from them. I just bring in 3 Lightning Axe, 1 Blast, and Abrupt Decay. Lightning Axe is just great in this matchup because it's also a form of enabling. Like, you don't need a Neonate or Cathartic Reunion if you have a Lightning Axe. Like, if you just play lands and they play a Thalia, so you can get rid of the Thalia and also discard Dredger, so you start dredging, which is a great catch-all. Like, usually you 2-for-1 yourself to Lightning Axe creature, but this way you actually trade 1-for-1 with a creature and also get your enabler in the graveyard, which is great. The Blast Zone is very strong against humans because a lot of their cards say the same converted mana cost. Like all their cards are on converted mana cost 1, 2, or 3, and most of the ones you care about are on 2 and 3. And you can also recycle the Blast Zone with Life from the Loam. And the great thing is, like, even if they have Grafdigger's Cage and you didn't expect it, Blast Zone still takes care of that in game 2. And the Abrupt Decay is just a nice catch-all. It destroys basically every permanent they have in the deck, and yeah, it's just good to
can
have.
just take care of everything from Ether Vial to Mantis Rider or any other creature they have.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely.
Or if they start missing land drops, you take out their Noble Hierarch. Or
Shrinking the mana can also be a tactic, in certain situations.
Yes.
And especially if they don't have actually Vial into play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you would like to add?
The only thing I would add is, like, if you see things like Grafdigger's Cage or maybe Relic of Progenitus in game 2, I would consider or recommend rather bringing in Ancient Grudge in the post-sideboard games, because Ancient Grudge usually deals quite well with those cards and also gets rid of Ether Vial, which is a nice bonus against this deck. But, like, you don't want to really board against Ether Vial without knowing they also have permanents for Graveyard Hate, but if they do, it's also a nice added bonus of also getting rid of Ether Vials in a longer game.
Okay, excellent, very clear. Last matchup for this episode. Storm, favorite or unfavored, good or bad?
It's hard to say. One thing that comes with the deck not being that hard of a meta factor anymore is that the lists start to diverge. Like, there are like two different basic variations. There's Twiddle Storm and there's just classic Brawl and Director Monster Storm. And each list play and adapt differently after sideboarding. And also in those lists there are quite some divergences. Like in Baral Storm, they have different plans after sideboarding, which makes it hard to predict what exactly is going to happen. The one constant here is mostly that they don't try to disrupt your game plan, but instead just try to be fast enough and resilient enough that your disruption doesn't really matter. So it's a matchup where you don't expect to need Nature's Claim, so you don't board it in directly. You just board in stuff to disrupt them long enough and hope that you win, because you can play undisrupted against them. If they try to disrupt you, like if they have Surgical Extraction and like some lists even play Snapcaster Mage and Lightning Bolts after sideboarding, you of course need to adjust. But mostly it's a sideboard. It's a matchup. Sorry. But mostly it's a matchup where you expect them to just try to do their thing, because they can be the faster combo deck, and you just need to disrupt them long enough and win with your creatures.
Okay, so post sideboard, it's actually your task to try to disrupt them,
Yes,
and they
for once.
have just and they have to instead, try to sneak and play and just make what they do, combo off and win anyway. Okay, I think that strategy is already clear. The cards you expect from them you mentioned, unless there is anything else, maybe some strange choices they could go for sometimes. I don't know.
One thing they occasionally play is Ravenous Trap, because it doesn't cost them any mana to play, so they can commit a Baral to the board on their turn, and then if you try to do anything in your turn, they can still play for 0 mana, and it takes care of your graveyard more effectively than a Surgical Extraction. Like if they are playing a weird list that goes into more controlling game plan after sideboarding, they sometimes play Snapcaster Mage and then Surgical Extraction, but usually they just want to get the one-shot effect of their trap off and exile your entire graveyard rather than trying to Surgical Extraction you twice. So that is something that can be expected. Apart from that, I don't think they really play anything you need to care about. Like, sometimes they play Weather the Storm nowadays after sideboarding to just try to gain enough life that your aggression plan isn't really cutting it anymore. But even then, like, even if they gain so let's say 30 life, you can still deal enough damage over a few turns because they don't really have a way to get rid of your creatures. So if you just have a few creatures sticking around and attacking every turn, you're usually fine against them.
All right. So let's talk about the cyber plans then. And here again, you have different cyber plans, whether you're on the play or on the draw, concerning what you board out. So let's have a look at this first. What you board out on the draw.
On the draw, I board out 1 Bloodghast, 1 Creeping Chill, 1 Insolent Neonate, and 2 Cathartic Reunion. The reason here again being you can cut down on your enabling after game 1. So I just cut 1 Neonate and 2 Reunion, and a bit of the payoffs here, which is just the Bloodghast and the Creeping Chill. Versus on the play, where what kind of cards you bought stays the same, but you just swap the 2 Cathartic Union for 2/3 cards, because now you can reliably resolve Cathartic Union turn 2, even if they have something like a counterspell, like a Remand or something, which they occasionally play. So yeah, that's really the only factor. If you prefer, you can just always cut Shriekhorn and keep Cathartic Union in, but it's not really that relevant in this matchup, but it does come up.
Okay, but in your case, I think it's worth actually keeping Cathartic Reunion when you're on the play.
It is a bit of an advantage, yes.
All right, very good. And what comes in?
So against Storm, I just bring in 3 Lightning Axe and 2 Lane of the Void. I'll just try to disrupt their main game plan, like Lightning Axe for destroying their creatures and also getting my Dredges into graveyard. And Leyline just makes it a lot harder for them to go off on their turn. There are, of course, the Storm versions that, after sideboarding, don't try to play around Path of Flames too much anymore. Instead, they bring in stuff like pieces of the puzzle and such, and just gain a lot of card advantage, and then just make like 20 goblins in one turn.
Okay.
With Empty the Warrens. Mostly, they don't sideboard too much into their alternative game plans against you in game 2. If they see that you have Leyline in game 2, which they usually do, because even if you don't have it in your opening hand, they're going to see it in the cards you put into your graveyard at some point. They sometimes adapt to that, but even then, just Lightning Axing the creatures is still very solid.
You mentioned Empty the Warrens before.
Yes.
If you see, for instance, you win game 1 and game 2, they win because they actually overwhelm you with all the goblins from Empty the Warrens. Would you change your strategy, or the strategy stays the same? And also the cards that you brought in, for instance.
The thing is, Dredge doesn't really deal well with too many creatures.
Okay.
Your only plan against Empty the Warrens is hopefully have a Conflagrate in your graveyard the turn they go for it, because then you can take care of like if, let's say, they make 16 goblins, you can take care of realistically 8 to 9 of them, and with the combination of blocking with Narcomoebas and Priced Amalgams and maybe having enough life from Keeping Chill, you can get through that. But if they get too many goblins, it kind of gets tough. But if you know that your opponent is on the Empty Warrens game plan, I would consider bringing in Thoughtseize as well, because if they resolve Empty Warrens for too many creatures, you can get in trouble. Also, Empty Warrens is just very good at blocking. Another thing I wanted to mention is, which is only very relevant against one of the Storm variants, against Twiddle Storm, is their entire game plan revolves around that they are able to tap their 1 land for 3 mana every time. And because the land also has hexproof, playing Ghost Squatter doesn't really do anything as that. But this is a match where Alpine Moon is also very relevant, where it's basically your best card against them. So if you have people who play Twiddle Storm in your meta, I also if you have Twiddle Storm and Titan decks in your meta, I would recommend Alpine Moon. Apart from that, it's doesn't really hit anything. But for those specific matchups, it's very good. Because if they're what's called Lotus Field, just as 1 mana, the deck just doesn't function. They don't really have a way to go off anymore.
Okay, I think we said it all for this one, and also we reached the end of the episode. So thank you very much for joining me once again, Emil.
It was a pleasure.
My pleasure, absolutely. And a big thank you to all of you who've been watching this video. We hope you enjoyed. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, and if you want to follow us on social media, you find all the information you need in the description of this video. All right, everybody. Have a great time casting your favorite spells. And for now, it's goodbye.